Ladies and gentlemen, over the years of chess, there have been many games played by some exceptional players, and in this video, I'm going to advocate and try to persuade you of the fact that I have found 5 chess games that absolutely everyone must know, and that means that you should know who played it and when, and the basic ideas. Maybe you don't remember absolutely every single move, but this video will hopefully serve for many levels. And if you basically had a sample size of 5 games to convince someone that chess was something worth pursuing, this will be the video. Timestamps are on the video player. Let's just jump right into it with the first game, and that is between Paul Morphy and the Duke Karl and Count Isouard. Now, some of you obviously may know this game already. This is the opera game, but in all of these games, I'm obviously going to take you through the moves, but also I'm going to take you through the ideas, and we're going to have a great time. All right, so I hope you're ready. Paul Morphy began the game with e4. Paul Morphy at this time is a kid, by the way. He's he's an absolute legend of the game and one of the greatest players who ever lived during his generation. And he was a genius, and he was playing against 2 people while at the opera. So back in the day, you could basically just play a game and it could be featured in a YouTube video hundreds of years later. So knight f3 and pawn to d6. Good center pawn movement here from Paul Morphy. Plays knight out, attacks the pawn, and black plays the move pawn to d6. And now white strikes in the center with a second central pawn. This is kind of standard. In general, you'd like to get 2 center pawns out, and if one of your pawns is going to get taken, then you would like to recapture with at least the knight, maybe a pawn as well, just to maintain some sort of center presence. But here, the 2 players with the black pieces played the move bishop to g4. And remember, this is like mid-19th century, so no one really knows a whole lot about chess, only the absolute brightest minds and geniuses. Bishop g4 is something known as a pin, and you are pinning this knight to this queen. If the knight moves, the queen will be taken. But it's actually not a very good move, because even though you're only temporarily relieving the pressure in the center, there's pawn takes e5. And so the point is that now if this pawn were to recapture prior to taking this and losing your queen, what you would do is you would take the queen of the opponent, and you would end in a position that's just simply superior for white. So instead of doing that, the players with the black pieces took on f3 first. So they traded the bishop for the knight, the queen came out, and now we got to this position. And from this point forward, this game is absolutely fantastic to show new players because there's a lot of prompts. And this was one of my favorite games to show kids in classrooms, because I could pause every move and kind of do a little quiz. For example, here, how does white make a move, giving the queen some help and creating a checkmate threat? And, well, the queen and the bishop, right, would stare together at the pawn. Anything that's protected only by a king is worth attacking, so we have bishop c4. Black here plays a smart move. I guess the players with the black pieces play a smart move, which is knight to f6. Knight to f6 blocks the queen's attack, and it also gets a piece out into the action, pressuring the center of the board. So obviously can't be a bad move. Now, the next prompt is, how does white recreate an attack on this pawn? Right, white only has the bishop staring, the queen's vision has been blocked. So if you go queen out to h5, yes, you complete one prompt, but you lose your queen in one move. But the queen actually slides over. That's a very tough move to see, especially for lower rated players. Queen b3 not only gives the bishop some support over on f7, but also targets the very weak pawn on b7, which is sort of the entire problem with moving this bishop out so early. Because black moved the bishop out this early, the queen side is just very weak. And after queen b3 is played, now there are 2 weaknesses, and black plays the move queen e7. Here, Paul Morphy chooses not to be greedy and take the b7 pawn, but rather develop another piece. What's interesting about queen b7 is that it looks like the rook in the corner is absolutely trapped. It's not. This is a concept that I like to refer to as danger levels. Obviously, long-time subscribers know what I'm talking about. Yes, the rook in the corner is worth a lot, but the king of white is worth more. And black can play queen to b4 check, defended by the bishop, and that forces a trade of queens, because otherwise, right, you're going to lose your queen. So Paul Morphy was like, I'm not going to trade queens against these bozos because they're not capable of beating me. I'm just going to continue to develop my pieces, and soon enough they will self-destruct. Black plays the move c6 here, which defends the pawn from the queen, and now bishop to g5. So as we saw earlier, this pin, we saw a pin of the knight and the queen. Now white does the very same. And here white is much better. White is much better because white has much more development. 4 pieces out and about, creating problems and complications for the opponent, ready to play long castles and bring the next rook in as well. So give white 2 more moves. White will be fully locked and loaded, whereas most of black's pieces are still on the starting rank. Which means this move is going to be black's attempt at pushing the white forces back. You know, this bishop is going to get pushed back, the knight is going to come out and attack the queen, and this is going to be black's attempt at salvaging the situation, but it's not. In fact, the move b5 just causes a whole nother world of problems in the form of a knight sacrifice, an investment of a knight for 2 pawns. Now, that's 3-2. That's obviously not a huge disparity, and the king is under attack as well. So here, black plays knight b to d7. The problem is that after white sacrifices the knight for the 2 pawns and fulfills long castling, white maintains 4 active pieces in the game, pinning this way, and black can't move anything. Even though black has a very temporary lead in material, black is just simply unable to utilize it whatsoever. If a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, doesn't make a sound, I don't know, debate it in the YouTube comments. But if you have a bunch of pieces and none of them can move, are you up the pieces? No, that's just unequivocally a no. And the position is about to go from bad to worse, because after rook d8, even though black is employing something I like to call cocoon defense, just sitting there and trying to maintain and try to survive, Paul Morphy detonates wicked stuff here with rook takes d7, sacrificing yet another one of his pieces for material that would be worth less. The king cannot take, obviously. The queen could, but be lost, so black simply takes with the rook, so as not to lose this queen. And Paul Morphy says, well, I still have a rook, so I've used every single one of my pieces in battle. You have not. And when the count and the duke try to trade queens, once again with Paul Morphy, he once again decided not to do that, because he is now down quite a bit of material. So if he were to continue to remove pieces from the board, it would not work. Instead, and you can pause here if you'd like to find the cherry on top, bishop takes d7 check, takes the rook, the knight takes, and now, of course, the queen trade is still available, but Paul Morphy says, no thank you, travels to the opposite side of the board, and instead of trading queens, sacrifices his queen to deliver bishop, rook, mate on the back rank. An absolutely beautiful game and a legendary game, and we have to start with this game. This has to be the appetizer. Maybe some of you have seen it. Maybe some of you watched anyway to just have a romanticized moment of this game. Maybe some of you jumped ahead, but we have to begin with the Paul Morphy opera game. Absolute beauty. Now, the next 2 games belong to a player by the name of Adolf Andersson, and this individual also in the 19th century was just an absolute unit. Like, this guy has 2 games on this list. I mean, imagine having 2 games on the best 5 games everybody should know list. So we're going to look at his games next. In the mid-19th century, chess was absolutely wild, which is why you would use it to advocate to players nowadays to play it, because it was crazy. It was absolutely nuts. And it was crazy because, in particular, there was one opening that went around known as the King's Gambit. So this is a gambit, and the point of this gambit is to make the black position take off center, so that you would get 2 center pawns, knights out into the middle, bishops out into the middle, and so on and so forth. In fact, back in the day, they were so wild, they allowed the opponent to attack their king and actually not have the right to castle anymore. They would move their king as early as move 4, because the presence of the queen in their territory would allow them to attack it and move their pieces forward. So they would sacrifice material and the right to castle to get a turbo supercharged attack. And it was very important back in the day to sacrifice things to throw your opponent's coordination off and kind of not let them get developed quickly, which is why Kizeretsky here played b5. That move looks completely idiotic. It's not the best move. It's also not the worst move. But the point was that you want the bishop off center. You actually don't want it to face at f7 like we saw in the last game, those weak squares, right? So black sacrifices and now develops a knight, and now it's like, all right, that bishop on b5 is stupid. Anderson plays knight to f3. And attacks the queen on h4. So now the queen is going to get pushed back. Queen goes back to h6, and Anderson plays the move d3. The point here is that he supports his center, and he's opening up his bishop to target the f4 pawn. And now black plays knight to h5. So knight to h5 does have an immediate threat, but obviously it would be better for black to develop some pieces. Well, not that. That would be illegal in transformed dimensions, but black really should be focusing on development. But black plays knight to h5. Kizeretsky sees that the king on f1 for white is vulnerable. Knight to g3 is a possibility. So if I take it with my pawn, I'm going to lose my rook, right? So we have knight to h4. So we have 2 knights meeting on the outside of the board, and Apologies. Apologies. I had something go wrong on my browser. It's been a wild day, by the way. There's crazy construction outside. I don't know if you all can hear that. I can hear it. Maybe my mic's not picking it up. Been a wild day. Knight to h4 is intended to block something going wrong on the h file, and Kizuretsky plays queen g5, which, by the way, just looks like a fork. I mean, it looks like Anderson just completely messed up. But he had an idea. His idea was to zig to the side and zag back to the middle, blocking the queen's vision. So now the queen cannot see anything, and obviously the knight is protected. Black plays the move c6. The point of c6 is to push the bishop back to the middle and potentially meet it with a move like d5. d5 is a very interesting move. It opens up the bishop and all of this, and it's absolute pandemonium here on the board. You know, Anderson had a feeling that if he sacrificed the bishop and maybe some more pieces, he would end up in a YouTube video about 170 years later. So for that reason here, he used danger levels and he played the wild move g4. There's a reason this game is nicknamed the Immortal game, and it's because, well, we're about to find out why it's so immortal. So obviously Kizuretsky can take and kind of try to deal with this initiative on this side of the board, but he chooses to save his knight. The problem with that is that Anderson locks in this pawn, and you would think, what the hell, what about this bishop? Yeah, well, what about this bishop? So he sacrifices the bishop for absolutely nothing, but he has built a box around the enemy queen on g5. So he plays h4. And then when the queen goes back, he plays h5. And the queen comes up, and he plays queen f3. And he saw all this. He was like, yes, 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 you can have my bishop. Go ahead, go ahead. But here's the problem. Now your queen's in jail. Your queen is surrounded by all my pieces, and I'm going to play bishop takes f4. Your queen's going to die. The only way to save the queen, retreat the knight, and get the queen a getaway square. So what does he do? Exactly that. But still, Kizuretsky maintains a material advantage, and a move like e5 here is possible to try to attack the rook. It looks good, but what happens then is the queen will go to c6. So black will solve the problem of the queen and the rook by moving the queen and trading, and you're not actually going to win anything at all. So as we've seen throughout the 19th century games, which we're going to see a lot today, knight to c3 is just intended to continue going forward. These games are like a steroid shot in the arm, or wherever you like to get your injections. Maybe butt cheek, I don't know. That is a strategy, by the way, not trying to be inappropriate. Everybody's into their own thing. Knight to c3, bishop to c5, and obviously, folks, obviously, nobody's going to save that rook. Anderson proceeds here to mobilize directly into the middle. Confrontation begins. The queen is under attack, but the queen can go down here. Now, there is a rook hanging and another rook hanging. So obviously, as a good player would do, they would save one of them, right? You gotta save one. No, no. This game is called the Immortal game because absolutely neither of those rooks get saved. In this position, and you are more than welcome to pause here and try to find it, white plays a ludicrous move, completely ludicrous move. And that move is bishop to d6. The point of this move is inviting an exchange which would transfer the knight in a space it would attack the king, but also when the knight moves, the queen opens up and the king gets hunted to death. That's the point. However, if that doesn't happen, you're also just going to take the bishop. So there are problems here. The problems are you're taking away squares from the king, and black has to do one or the other. Either allow the knight and queen in or not, and hope that that doesn't happen. And while black chooses the second, which is to take this rook. Now, yes, black can also play queen takes a1, check. And then after something like king to e2, take the second rook. But the problems are the exact same. The problems are basically identical, and when the knight and the bishop and the queen enter, it's going to be bad news. So black chooses to take on g1 with the bishop, and here is probably the most savage move of the entire game, which is Anderson playing e5. E5 is so gross and dirty, and it's the point of it is it's like in Kingsman. You ever seen the movie Kingsman, where they lock the door of the bar and then they just beat everybody up? That's what E5 is. Or it's like Rorschach, Watchmen, you know? I'm not locked in here with you, you're locked in here with me. Yeah, go ahead, take my rook with check, get your 2 rook in piece advantage, but I have closed the door on your queen. So your queen now cannot see the other side of the board. My bishop is anchored into d6, suffocating your king, and now it's me who is going to attack you. And in this position, when black finally got a knight into the game, Anderson detonated knight takes g7 check, king to d8. This knight covers bishop c7, but this knight while it temporarily covers knight to e7, will get forced out with a queen sacrifice. Knight takes on f6, and bishop to e7, check, and mate. And none of that would have been possible without e5, shutting the door on the queen, not just from the f6 square, but also g7. Absolutely savage infiltration by Anderson, who wins this game with barely any pieces on the board. These games barely look real, which takes me to game number 3, also Anderson. Anderson was a fan of flashy stuff. I can see him playing these games with like 3 shirts unbuttoned. You know, like a beautiful dress shirt. Some people unbutton 2 shirts because they got a nice little healthy amount of chest hair, right? They look kind of boss. I think he just played in a button. He wore a button-down shirt and he didn't wear any of the buttons. That's the kind of gentleman I imagine Adolf Anderson to be. This game is known as the Evergreen game. I don't know why. Hopefully they showered him with some dollar bills after this game. But yeah, this is just him being a genius once again. Now, by the way, no King's Gambit this game. I guess Anderson only played King's Gambit against people he mightily disrespected and who he wanted to basically posterize. But we see knight f3, knight c6. We see bishop c4, bishop c5, an Italian game, but the Evans Gambit. Actually, an opening very popular to this day. b4 is a fantastic move, which is intending to deflect one of the pieces off center. We saw this last game, by the way. Do you remember b5? Were you paying attention? No? Did you just jump ahead to this game? You were paying attention, but you forgot because chess is hard. I understand. Bishop takes b4. Now, by sacrificing a pawn off center, what you're going to do is win tempi by attacking these pieces. So you have boop, and you have boop. So now white attacks the center of the board, and as black is spending multiple moves, you see, this is now multiple moves with the bishop, multiple moves with the pawn taking white stuff, white castle. So white is down 2 pawns, but black is sort of tied weirdly together here. White is going to try to get the entire center in a moment. So black's like, I don't want white to get the whole center, so now I'm going to make a 3rd move with my pawn to try to throw off white's coordination. He's like, yo, Anderson, take my pawn, please. Anderson's like, no, don't you know who I am? I don't take material and slow down my initiative. Kaboom! I got this, I got this in game 1 of this video already, right? Queen and bishop targeting the f7 pawn. That's the beautiful thing about learning from these 19th century games. When you begin games with the king's pawn, your bishop and queen are so useful to attack the weak light square of the opponent. That's why e4 for beginners is a very real problem and a very challenging weapon to the opponent, right? Queen b3, queen f6. Now, folks, if I were to ask you how does white attack this queen to kind of continue the initiative, you're probably going to say one of these 2 moves, and you're probably going to be correct. That is exactly what Anderson does. He continues to attack. Black plays queen g6, and here is perhaps the slowest move of this entire game. Anderson's like, well, I can't really attack anything else. Knight to h4 is silly. Queen just goes here. I'm going to bring my rook. Can't be a bad move. Rook to the middle of the board, behind the pawn. Bad intentions in the future with e6. Black develops, white develops, right? Let's bring this bishop out here. It will see the entire diagonal. That really shows the power of the dark squared bishop, and that dark squared bishop is going to be very important. Now, rather than castling here, black utilizes the strategy of deflection, right? Trying to distract the white pieces in terms of taking and then maybe attacking them with this rook. White doesn't really have a choice. White has to take, so he takes with the queen and then moves like this. And it seems like black actually is figuring out some stuff, right? Lining up his own kind of threats to Anderson's king with the bishop. Anderson, knight bd2, bishop b7. And it seems like actually we finally met our match. We met a guy who also sacrifices pieces and also has activity and everything looks good. But we're talking about Adolf Anderson. Like, you just have to wait a little bit, right? It's gonna happen, okay? It's like a heavyweight. It's like a heavyweight. It's gonna land the punch. They will. And it's gonna be really bad when it happens. So knight e4. Point of knight e4, there's a king in the middle. And you're supporting, right, that pawn anchor. We see Anderson's 2nd game in a row really likes this pawn anchor. We'll use it to transfer that knight, sacrifice, and open up the position. Also, this disconnects the queen from the defense of the pawn, which we see promptly captured. And the queen goes to h5. And now is Anderson's moment. He's like, the black king is still in the middle of the board. Gotham just said that the pawn on e5 is going to be used as an anchor. So what am I going to do? Knight to f6. These sacrifices are very common when the opponent's king is stuck in the center. If the opponent doesn't castle, you can sacrifice material to open things up because more often than not, you're going to win it back, right? However, rook g8, and to the untrained eye, this also looks kind of annoying. You have 3 very powerful pieces staring down at your king as well. The problem is that one of you is one of the greatest attacking players of your generation, and the other guy is named after pants. So that is, yeah, that is where this kind of imbalance of chess ability goes. So we have Rook d1, bringing his final piece, which has not gotten a turn to battle. And here, that looks like a blunder, by the way, because of this move. That just looks like a mistake. Queen takes f3. What? Has Anderson blundered? Look at this. He can't take the queen. He's a move away from getting mated. In fact, he's a move away from getting mated in a variety of different violent fashions. And then you remember who we're actually watching play. And for that reason, Anderson plays Rook takes e7 check. That's the beginning of the violence. Black takes with the knight and seemingly opens up yet another layer of pressure. I mean, white is on the verge of death here. And yeah, here, absolutely brutal. Queen takes d... Wait, that's not protected? Wait a minute, that's not guarded at all. Nobody's protecting it. The bishop's in the way. King d7. Double check. Double check. Now the king is attacked on both sides, so the king must move. If the king goes this way, the bishop slides behind it, and it's mate. It's mate. King to c6. Bishop d7 is a mate. Hunted by the crisscross applesauce bishops. And if the king goes to e8, the same problem. But now the bishop squished the king to death. And this pawn, which was an anchor on e5, is now an anchor on f6. And the king is brutalized. All the while, the black pieces were salivating at the pressure that they were about to inflict on this king over here. But it's Anderson delivering once again in a violent fashion. And that is the third game that everyone must know. And now we will move to the fourth game. This is also around the time of all these greats. This is a game between McDonald and La Bourdonnais, who has one of the most gangster names, LCM DLB. Imagine reporting that on a tax return of the late 19th century. Yeah, this game is either late 19th century or 1900s. Let me just confirm that before I say it's 1834. So actually early 19th century. Yeah, La Bourdonnais was an early legend, early master, and this game is just simply fantastic. We will actually watch this and the next game from the perspective of the player with the black pieces, because we have to honor the legends. Okay, this game begins with a Sicilian defense, so e4, c5, not a king's pawn. Clearly, La Bourdonnais was not in the not going to get brutalized with some, you know, king's gambit or anything like that. Both players play for the middle of the board. We have cd4, knight d4, and e5 now and only now. The major difference being that it's just a completely different opening, so there's no king's gambits. We see a trade in bishop c4. We've seen this pattern many times now, attacking the f7 pawn. We have knight to f6 and bishop g5. So white is very aggressive. Coming out here with the bishops, white is most likely going to get the queen out and castle. Black blocks the pin. And, like a good player, doesn't castle, like a good 19th century player, doesn't castle, and instead takes the center with two pawns immediately, even though this will invite some sort of captures and potential weaknesses. So, white takes on f6, bishop takes f6, and slides back with the bishop on b3. The point here is that white wants to play knight c3, take at some point, bring the rook, and all of these pieces are going to attack this pawn on d5. La Bourdonnais is like, I don't care. a5, go ahead, do your worst. Bishop a6. a5 is an amazing move. It has two threats. This and this. This is already kind of a very different style than the games that we've seen, but it's still a completely legendary game for all of the beautiful things that have yet to unfold. Obviously, we're not seeing some crazy queen sacrifice. We're not seeing checkmate in 20 moves, but we see fantastic piece coordination. a4, bishop a6, all these different ideas. I am just awful at drawing arrows today. ed5, cd5, and rook to d1. So what is black going to do about this? Push it forward. Push it forward so that pawn cannot be taken. Now, c4. The point of c4 is that if you take en passant, obviously there is the issue of your queen. So black moves the queen out of the way, and now the bishop comes back to c2. There is the pressure on this diagonal. That was the idea of white. White wants to go queen e4 as well, attacking the rook and creating a checkmate threat. Obviously, that doesn't get blundered. That gets parried, right? The queen lighthouse is not able to be formed. Knight d2, rook e8, and knight to e4. So white is still trying to take and play on the light squares. And if you're wondering why black has not taken the pawn on b2, it's because that would get hit with... oh, I apologize. That would get hit with bishop takes h7 check, and you lose your queen. So that's why that did not occur. So we have knight d2, knight e4. Black's like, nope, I don't want you to take my bishop, and let me block this diagonal counterattack over here. But at this point, Bourdonnais is kind of angry that he hasn't won the game in 20 moves like most other people did in the early 1800s, so he begins an attack. And you have to begin an attack with your 3 musketeer pawns. Keep an eye on these pawns. Queen to c4 check. The king slides out of the way, the knight must still be dealt with. So oh, never mind, the knight doesn't still have to be dealt with because we have this. Okay, well that looks fantastic. Queen flies over to h6, idea to attack the king, idea to deal with this knight, and white takes on e8. Black takes the knight in the center, leaving this bishop still under attack, and these pawns can potentially march down. c6, so total chaos, right? The bishop is hanging, the queen can go for the king, this bishop is hanging, and the pawn might promote. So what's gonna happen? Pawn takes pawn. In the middle of all that, you can take a bishop, you can save your bishop, but instead you take the pawn. Why? Why? Well, must be an attack on the king is coming, right? The queen is going to come, the pawn is going to come. Rook c2. Intending to meet this queen entry with good laser beam defense. The rooks cover the second and the first rank very splendidly. So what does black do now? Transfers the bishop back. The bishop is now set to arrive and potentially create some very menacing threats on that diagonal. This bishop immediately blocks that bishop's path, but Bourdonnais plays f2. The idea of f2 being that you want to play f1, but not right away because you can't. All right, well, if you can't do that, then rook f1, I'm just going to block everything. But remember I told you to keep an eye on these pawns? Yeah, these pawns are hooligans. They're about to do some nasty stuff to this position. d3, all right? Rook c3, and before we have the final crescendo of this game of the pawns, let's make sure that nothing happens with these bishops. Let's trade them real quick, and e4. So everything protects everything, but how exactly is black going to break through? I'm not really sure, so white takes the liberty to attack black still, right? Because queen takes, promote. If you do this, I'm going to make a new queen. Yeah, just bishop d8. I close the door, I block the promotion square. Now it's my turn. I'm gonna attack you. Queen e1! My own first rank queen sacrifice. Rook to c1 defends everything, right? d2! The queen is now protected by 2 anchor pawns on the first rank. Queen goes out to c5, creating a checkmate threat. Rook g8. You actually have the luxury of just playing this horribly passive move because your queen is protected. And what's worse, this sandwich of rook, queen, and pawns, e3, and the pawn is about to arrive on the second rank, but not before we sack the queen and we do this. And white resigns. The threats are as follows. Taking the rook with mate, promoting the pawn on f1 with mate, promoting the pawn on e1 with mate. You cannot stop all 3 threats. If you go queen c1, I'll take your queen first, and then, or I will queen like this as well, and white resigned. Have you ever seen something like that? 3 pawns on the second rank, all threatening various promotions? That is insane. That is completely nuts. And with that, we travel over 100 years into the future, 150 years exactly, I think, or 151, to the final game of this video, which is the game between Anatoly Karpov and Garry Kasparov from one of their world championship matches, I believe the second one in 1985. This game is legendary because, while I really like these old school games of swashbuckling chess and make it really interesting for everybody, the truth is that chess elevated in its quality, preparation, resources, and availability of information over the years. In fact, it's astoundingly high now in 2022, or whenever you're watching this. Maybe you're watching this in 2026 or something. And the level was much higher, and so I just wanted to feature a game that it will be fun to remember. Keyword for this game, octopus. Yeah, you might be confused. So, we have another Sicilian defense, right? That's why I like that bridge between the years. Knight f3, and now not knight c6 as we saw, but e6. But we have the same moves by white. Isn't that fascinating? 150 years. And the players already knew what to do in 1834, how to play the Sicilian. Crazy, right? We have knight to c6 now. We didn't have it on the second move, but we have it on the fourth. Knight b5. And the players get out to a very interesting pawn structure, which looks like this. The point is that Karpov is trying to control black's center advance of d5 with the 2 pawns, the knight and the queen. This knight has ventured to the edge of the board, but will come back and continue to fight for the center like this. It's just the system. It's a strange way of playing, but it's a real thing. But Kasparov here plays the pawn to d5 anyway, which doesn't look like it makes any sense, because after takes, he's just a pawn down. He's just a pawn down. I suppose he's going to win it back. Okay, Kasparov, let's see what you got. Gary, take the pawn. Wait, Gary, what are you doing? Why did you give him a pawn, which is also protected now by even more pieces, and it's got no blockade to the end of the... Wait, what? What is going on? Well, folks, this is Kasparov Masterclass. This is one of the best games ever, and if you had the patience to stick around this long in the video, you're going to be absolutely treated to some amazing stuff. Kasparov, in this game, didn't sacrifice pieces and all and deliver a mate with 2 pieces remaining, but he utilized his opponent's material edge to break the coordination of the opponent's position. And what I mean by that is, he used all the open lines around the pawn to develop all his pieces actively. And because the opponent had to be passive and defending, Gary activated all of his pieces. So knights, bishops, queen, now rook to the completely open file, seeing the entire board, right? Queen d2, and this is the beginning of the problems. b5. Gary's not interested in winning this pawn back. What he's interested in is taking away all forward movement of his opponent's pieces. This bishop can't move forward. This knight can't move forward. This knight, which was intending to transfer back at some point, is stuck. You've completely stranded the knight. It cannot move at all. And if it goes to b1, that's it. Where's it gonna go? It's not gonna eat its friend, right? So what does Karpov do? Rook d1, right? He's gotta bring a rook. We've seen that. Octopus. Knight to d3. This knight controls 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares in the opponent's territory. Octopi, right? Have 8 legs. The octopus knight, a knight that you can plant on your opponent's side of the board. It sees 8 directions. They're all useful too, and nobody can get rid of it. That knight is about to ruin Karpov's entire day. Knight back to b1. Now Kasparov says, I've planted my knight. Pawn to h6, I'm attacking your bishop. What are you going to do about it? Okay, of course, you're going to maintain the pin. Queenside attack, pawn to b4. Your knight moves to attack my bishop, and I slide out of there. And now you have a new problem. Your knight on b1 is trapped. Your knight on a4 is trapped. One pawn stops 2 knights. Have you ever seen something like that? Also, by the way, this entire time, your bishop is staring into your own pawn. It's almost as if you wish you can take it off the board, but you can't. It's your pawn to live with. So now bishop back to g3. I want to trade some pieces. Gary's like, sure, let's trade pieces. Look at my rooks, by the way. Have you ever seen 2 rooks see the entire length of the board and no one can do anything about it because the knight controls both of the opponent's moves? Octopus knight, baby. And here we have b3. b3 is maybe trying to bring this knight back and trade the octopus knight. So what does Gary do? g5. The point of g5 is that if you try to do this knight b2 nonsense to me, I'm gonna trap your bishop at some point. That stupid thing, and also, I have an escape route. If I really need it, my knight is going to be supported by my g-pawn. Not only will I live in your position forever, I also have an escape route. Ha! Bishop takes d6, queen takes d6, g3. Oh, you wanna stop my escape route? Oh, that's very nice. Knight to d7. My knight is now rerouting. I'm going to go to e5, and I'm going to bully your light squares on this side of the board. Bishop back to g2, queen f6. Also, for good measure, you can now no longer move your knight to b2. Your knights are still trapped. As Karpov desperately looks for moves, he tries to play a3 and break out on the queen side with queen a2. Rotates the queen over. Finally, the knight has been given a little bit of reprieve. Bishop to g6. And now, finally, Karpov must have been feeling happy. He got to push his pawn. The pawn, look at this, the bishop is active. But there's no one there. The pieces arriving on the queen side, there's nothing there. It's been vacated. All of Kasparov's pieces have transferred to attack the king. He used the center blockade for so long to take space on the king side for when he needed it, and now he's gonna move his king side forward. f3, he wins this damn pawn. By the way, can we just address the fact that this knight has lived here for the entire second half of this game? It arrived there on move 16. It's about to be move 32. Okay, we have pawn takes on g4, check here, knight f6. That's 32 moves per player. It's lived there the entire second half of this game, but now Karpov has had enough because the king is about to be hunted. So he goes rook to f4, knight e4, and decides to sacrifice his queen for the knight. We have knight to f2 check opening up this, and that's it. That knight was so powerful, it required the monarch of the opponent to be sacrificed for it, and Kasparov finished this game off in style by bringing in the rook down the entire length of the board. And the final move of this game, obviously there are some tactics here. If you take my queen, I take this, you have all sorts of back rank problems. But really the cherry on top of this entire game was that the final move of this game was the last rook going the entire length of the board. Karpov resigned because after knight or bishop to f1, you do this, this, and this. And it is check, and it is mate. He would have used all of his resources to win this game. And I've never seen something like that. I've never seen an octopus knight that powerful. I've never seen two rooks dominate two of the only open files on the board, and then ultimately go down on those open files to the end and get the king out of there and win in such a fashion. Obviously, chess evolved from the 19th century to the late 20th century, but it still goes to show you there are some absolutely beautiful games. And remember, these games are just the picks that I have for you. These games are just my personal opinion. If you have to show people 5 games and convince them that the game of chess is worth playing, I believe that you should go for these 5. Folks, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for having the patience to hang out with me. I will see you in the next one. Get out of here.